Hello everyone, good evening. Welcome to the Global Virtual Conference on Commemorating Past Genocide and Learning to Prevent Atrocity Crimes. Today with us in the session, Bangladesh Genocide in Global Perspective, we have our two panelists, Siegfried Oath and Paulo Casaka. And I will be the moderator for the session. And I'm Nadia Islam Nodi, a student of LLM Jahangirnagar University. So each of the panelists will have 15 minutes each for their presentation, and there we will have a question answer session. So first of all, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Siegfried Wolf, who is the Director of Research, South Asia Democratic Forum, SADF. And then I will give the floor to Paulo Casaka, who is also the founder and executive director of the SADF. So first of all, let's give the floor to Siegfried Oath. Over to Siegfried.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Nadia, for the kind introduction. And it's always a pleasure to be part of your conference series and also pass my greetings to your colleagues from Jahangirnagar University, which I know very well from my own fieldwork there. Today, I have the pleasure to share my views with you on the international context of the Bangladesh Liberation War, and I will start also now immediately with my presentation. In 1971, the world witnessed the emergence of Bangladesh during its struggle for liberation. Wait a second. The Bengali people had to face not only extreme atrocity, but also a genocide of 3 million people conducted by Pakistani forces and their Islamist collaborators. The question that arises is why the international community was not willing to stop the military operation in then Pakistan's eastern wing right from the beginning. Due to the presence of international media and diplomatic missions, there was credible and impartial reporting about the start of large-scale massacres and target killings in Dhaka and other urban areas. Most remarkable in this context were the reports of US Consul General Archer Blood until he was recalled from his post in Dhaka, obviously for being too inconvenient. Most significant was his last cable on April 6, 1971, which is also known as a blood telegram, in which he denounced the complicity of the United States administration of then US President Richard Nixon and his national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, in genocide. In this context, one has to state that the whole process of Bangladesh state formation didn't happen in a South Asian vacuum. The national liberation struggle of the Bengali people against the oppression of West Pakistan coincided with and became enmeshed in a major structural transformation of the existing international relations and the system. The most characteristic feature of this phenomenon was that the rigid bipolarity determined by the rivaling two superpowers, United States on one side and the Soviet Union on the other side, was loosening. A major catalyst of this was the Soviet-China split, which became unbridgeable after the ideological differences between Maoist Beijing and Marxist-Leninist Moscow, culminating at the border conflict between both countries in 1969. Not only was the myth of a monolithic communist camp publicly brought to an end, but also increasing strains within the anti-communist coalition appeared. The rising conflicts over economic interests between the United States, Western Europe, and Japan marked the onset of a mutual alienation. As a result, the global order in the early 1970s shifted from bipolarity towards some kind of multipolarity. Even though the old polar powers, United States and Soviet Union, were still dominant, new emerging players were gaining more international leverage, most notably China with its growing economic power and India with respect to its large landmass and huge population. Nevertheless, the sharp Cold War antagonism, as well as the omnipresent threat of a Third World War, remained. This very context had severe implications for the Bangladeshi independence struggle. The political leadership of the most significant players at the global scene were aware that the newly emerging international system became more politically volatile. Hence, it became more difficult to maintain control over areas which were seen as part of the respective influence. Especially in Washington, after the failure of its rollback policy against communism, as the Korea War and the Bay of Pigs invasion demonstrated, a major redefinition of its foreign policy was getting off the ground. At the core of this new policy orientation was the understanding that a relaxation in the Soviet-US relation was necessary. From an US perspective, to toss the encrusted Cold War constellation, a rapprochement with China, which was also kept ambitious newcomers like India at bay, was seen as one of the most eminent cornerstones of this strategy. The overall aim of this newly introduced policy was to balance Beijing and Moscow, as well as to restrain the influence of the increasing apparent alliance between New Delhi and Moscow. The Indo-Soviet Friendship Treaty, signed in August 1971, further aggravated Nixon's personal antipathy against India and her Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Despite the fact that China under Mao Zedong was already to open up towards Washington because it was confronted with Soviet forces amassing at its borders, so the United States had no direct access to the Chinese leadership at that time. This brought Pakistan into the picture. With the help of Islamabad and the support of the army, a secret liaison between Washington and Beijing was facilitated. China was increasingly seen as an ally of convenience to secure US interests in South Asia, and Pakistan was identified as the only possible conduit for it. However, the United States were very skeptical regarding the prospect for West Pakistan to maintain control over its eastern wing in case of an armed confrontation. The chance for Islamabad to keep in check the Bengali aspiration for liberation themselves from the West Pakistani choke become even poorer, with few on the Indian support for the freedom fighters and the unfavorable geographic conditions. Basically, the Nixon administration feared any foreign intervention into the Bangladesh Liberation War. So the United States were primarily concerned about an Indian intervention. Washington's rationale in this context was that New Delhi would bandwagon with the struggle of the Bengali to finally settle its scores with Islamabad, which would have, from Washington's perspective, dramatic consequences. It was expected that if India helped to set East Pakistan free, it would be tracked in New Delhi's slipstream and thereby be turned into another client state of the Soviet Union. Furthermore, there were serious concerns among US security circles at that time that India would use the event to send its troops towards Islamabad to oust the pro-US military regime and perhaps even to dismember its neighbor. Given the fact that Washington saw the Pakistani military as the most suitable partner for accommodating US interests in the Pakistani rump state and the extended region, an Indian intervention was perceived as an existential threat to US interests. It would lose its only ally on the subcontinent, which also provided the key towards China. To prevent such a scenario from happening, Washington announced a policy of maximum intimidation against India. Therefore, US naval forces were sent into the Bay of Bengal, and China was asked to amass troops at the Indian frontier to increase pressure on the Indian decision makers. At the same time, the US attempted to enforce a ceasefire through the United Nations Security Council to protect Pakistan from a militarily enforced breakup. However, none of these measures of the Nixon administration worked out as intended. First, the US proposal for ceasefire at the UN Security Council got vetoed by the Soviets. Second, the Chinese did not build up as much military pressure on its border with India as expected. Third, New Delhi was not impressed by the American gunboat diplomacy and just ignored the presence of the Seventh Fleet of the US in its waters. Instead, it intervened and Bangladesh gained its independence. But the most fundamental mistake of Nixon and Kissinger were their fatal misperception of Indira Gandhi's intentions regarding Pakistan and the Soviet Union. In contrast to US fears, India was not at all interested to slice the West Pakistani pie. The alliance with the Soviet Union was a logical consequence of the anti-Indian sentiments in Washington. In other words, it was based on pragmatism and not on friendship. Therefore, there was no threat that India or Bangladesh be turned into Soviet client state. In sum, it seems that the world accepted the potential separation of East Pakistan and the formation of a new independent state of Bangladesh as a fait accompli. The only remaining issue for the US, China, and partly also for the Soviet Union was how to get West Pakistan through the East Pakistan crisis with as little damage as possible. To be sure, all major players, besides India, had no interest to get deeply involved in the conflict, neither militarily nor diplomatically, by putting sufficient pressure on Islamabad to stop the genocide among Bengali people and the pogrom-like killings of Bengali political leaders and intellectuals. Moscow and Washington just wanted to be sure that the respective adversary would not gain too much influence in South Asia and that no regional player would gain a hegemonic position. Therefore, maintaining the contentious triangle of India, Pakistan, China appeared the most appropriate strategy for the US to maintain some kind of balance in South Asia. With the independence of Bangladesh and the preservation of territorial integrity of West Pakistan, this common goal was apparently achieved. Therefore, leaving aside Pakistan, the governments of the major powers were officially satisfied with the outcomes of the war. The United States was able to achieve its minimum goal to preserve an allied Pakistani rump state and maintaining its strength as much as possible. Furthermore, it was able to keep the Soviet Union out of the conflict. China was able to stand up against the Soviet Union, which had to accept the sovereignty and territorial integrity of China. Furthermore, the US approach to seek an alliance with Beijing undoubtedly bolstered China's international leverage and prestige. This finds its most debatable expression in granting China a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council to the detriment of Taiwan in October 1971. This also marks a move against India, which wasn't granted a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. Regardless, India had been able to substantially weaken its enemy Pakistan and to establish a hegemonic position in South Asia. Furthermore, it did not yield under US pressure. Finally, the Soviet Union was able to maintain its alliance with India to counterbalance China. In this context, the Bangladesh Liberation War demonstrated that the US and other members of the United Nations were willing to fade out any esteem for democratic principle and human rights in order to achieve their goal in 1971. The prevalence of inaction regarding the genocide of the Bengali people committed by the Pakistan armed forces must be interpreted as a clear ignorance of the 1948 UN Convention on the Punishment and Prevention of the Crime of Genocide by the respective national governments. To drive at least partly the democratic reputation of Western sphere, one might differentiate between the governments and societies in the United States and the bandwagoning Western Europe. There were deep sympathies towards the freedom struggle of the Bengali people among the civil societies, and much activity was carried out to pressure the political leadership to change the policy direction in favor of the Bengali people. Here, the groundbreaking article by Anthony Mascarenhas, Genocide, published in the Sunday Times on June 13, 1971, functioned as a final wake-up call. This phenomenon found not only its expression that the US Congress was forced to pass an embargo of weapons against Pakistan, but also in some of the world's greatest charity events. Concerts for Bangladesh were organized in New York to raise funds and international awareness for the refugees following the genocide. However, these efforts were made far too late to change the unfortunate course of trajectories of global politics. To conclude, the victims of the Bangladesh Liberation War were not only sacrifices of the Pakistani army, but also of the global realpolitik at this time. Or, in other words, they were a payoff for helping the US to open up towards China. However, the price for this policy, 3 million killed Bengali, 30 million internally displaced persons, the exodus of 10 million people, the rape of hundreds of thousands of women, and the ravaging of wide parts of the country was paid by the Bengali people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Siegfried. We are very pleased to have your thoughtful remarks on this very imminent issue, which I did not mention earlier, that is Bangladesh's liberation war and the role of international actors. And you have very commendably remarked out many of the situations which were political or incidental. So we will hear from you again in the question answer session. Now we will be giving the floor to Paulo Casaca, and he will be delivering his presentation on the topic Bangladesh International Crimes Tribunal, an effective tool against impunity. Let us hear his thoughts on this very event of commemorating 50 years of liberation of Bangladesh, because it is indeed very important for us, the liberation and also the justice process. So over to you, Paulo.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Ms. Nodi, for your kind presentation. Allow me to ask you to send my very best regards to Mofidul Haq, the long date friend and a figure that has been sustaining the Liberation War Museum for such a long time, and that has been taking so many initiatives to highlight the importance of the issue. This session is exactly dedicated to highlight the global importance of what we are discussing. And when I was invited, I decided to concentrate on the last paper I wrote on the issue, which was on 2018, and in cooperation with Susan Goada, and that culminates a series of papers and interventions I had, some of them thanks to the Liberation War Museum, on the issue. What is more important to bear in mind is that the Bangladesh genocide is one, well, in numerical terms, it's the most important after the Holocaust. So if we consider the Holocaust as an historical landmark, it's the most important of our era. At the world stage, at the global stage, it's more than something that has to do with Bangladesh or even to South Asia. Number one thing. And number two, I think it's up to now, it has been the one that has been dealt still better than any other that we have had up to now. And that's exactly to this point that I would like to dedicate my words. I mean, I would invite everyone that is interested to go to our website, to the South Asia Democratic Forum website, and to look at the working paper number 11, that is called Crimes Against Humanity and Assessment of Bangladesh Response in a Comparative Perspective, the cases of Cambodia and Iraq, that are, I can explain why, but I think are the most telling in this context. But the main issue is, and perhaps already trying to answer to one question that I have here from Famin Tajin, but why the international actor is criticizing the legal value of the International Court Tribunal Bangladesh trials. I mean, not only criticizing, but I mean, trying to smash it. It is really unbelievable how the silence that was made, institutional silence. Fortunately, there were some figures in the West that denounced the silence on what was going on in Bangladesh. Well, Dr. Siegfried Wolf just mentioned perhaps one of the most important, perhaps the most important of them all, this blood telegram. It's really a landmark, a fundamental symbol of someone that thought, I cannot cope with this. There is no way that I can obey and follow the instructions of the authorities, because there is a principle of humanity that is in jeopardy, and I cannot tolerate this situation. This is, in my perspective, this is comparable to all of those, and some of them we know, for instance, a Portuguese diplomat that refused to follow orders from their authorities regarding the Holocaust, and passed, tens of thousands of visas against instructions for Jews to be able to escape from the Holocaust. So there was some sound about it, but institutionally there was silence. And when the ICT was resumed in 2010, I mean, the chorus of condemnation was absolutely widespread, universal, and absolutely outrageous. I mean, those who could not care for the life of 3 million victims were absolutely out of their mind with the possibility that those that committed these murders could have not been really have had their rights followed. And just to give you an example, one of the few things, objective things, that were found by the critics was, well, the defendant's lawyers have only 3 weeks to reply to the accusations. Oh, tremendous, that's unbelievable, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, at the very same time, the same international actors that were claiming and that were making all this noise against Bangladesh were directly or indirectly praising and to a court in Iraq to try those who were Saddam Hussein and others that were accused of crimes against humanity, where all the legal conditions were incomparably worse, where the rights of defendants are no comparison. There were no rights of defendants. Actually, several of the lawyers of defense were shot during the trial. For instance, it's one of the many things we can say about this Iraqi trial that was really a sham. Of course, there is no doubt that very serious crimes against humanity and even to a certain extent genocide took place on the instructions of Saddam Hussein and the leaders of his government, and of course there should be no impunity for them. But putting this into perspective, and seeing that the international community had a much bigger responsibility in Iraq, because I mean, the international community invaded Iraq. Bangladesh behaved incommensurably better. And if we take the other point of comparison, which is Cambodia, where fundamentally the United Nations took care of the process, I mean, there is no way to compare Cambodia and Bangladesh. I mean, the politicization, the interference of the government in the trial in Cambodia are absolutely enormous. The results are very meager to nothing. I mean, actually, most of the culprits did not really experience any punishment. And so the only example of where, of course, not without criticism, because I do not believe, in perfection. Human beings are not perfect by nature. So, of course, it was not perfect. Of course, if you look at it, you can always find this or that could have been done in a better way. No question about that. But uh, having our feet on the ground and looking in an objective way, there is nothing as good as it was done by Bangladesh through the ICT. And the fact that those who should have been praising ICT and the authorities of Bangladesh for its accomplishments, they have not done that, makes it absolutely vital to repeat this without any hesitation. You did a magnificent job. You passed the message more than any other court. You passed the message that you should not count with impunity. Even if now we are going for 50 years, even if 50 years are passed, well, don't count on it. Don't count that you can remain impune. Those who were the culprits, they used their large fortune, because a lot of them had actually became very, very wealthy. And that's the reason why we can understand all of the fuss and all of the movement that was developed in their defense. Um, but the issue is that justice was served. And the question is, well, the geopolitics is different. Yeah, it is different. But there is one thing that now, that in the 10 years that we have been seeing from this second period of activity of the ICT, there is one thing that explains why the international community continues to do what it has done in the past, which is money. Very simply, money, nothing else. If you look at all, well, especially Human Rights Watch, which is an organization that was rightly classified in 2016 as the least transparent of the American NGOs, and does not publish its financial accounts, does not explain who finances it, which for an organization that purports itself as a sort of court is absolutely essential. You really cannot do it without explaining who is paying for you. But the Human Rights Watch is really the most extreme example. But it's not the only one. And money that is what unfortunately is making a lot of the world goes wrong, is in the hands of the Islamists that were the culprits of the massacre and the genocide in the first place, and they still go on having a lot of power, and they are the ones who made all of this campaign. This is the reason why. And unfortunately, the United States, that did not behave as it should 50 years ago, as Dr. Wolf just explained. And at the time, there would be, a geopolitical explanation for this. Now there is no geopolitical explanation whatsoever. But still, in the United States, it's still the same forces continue, because the infiltration of this Islamist ideology continues, although there is no geopolitical reasons to do it. 50 years ago, there was this belief that Islamists would be the barrier to the expansion of the Soviet Union. That was fundamentally the reason why that the United Kingdom and then the United States thought it was a very good idea to break India and to make this rampart, this block to Soviet Union not being able to get to the India. But now you can't say it any longer. Actually, reality is showing how the geopolitics act in a different way, but still it's still the same logic. So I would like to say the reality and the objective comparison of facts is there. We produced it, we stand by it. ICT, Bangladesh, you did a magnificent job. You deserve our congratulations. You deserve the congratulations of all of those around the world that believe in human rights and that want impunity to finish. And this is the message I would like to that you would continue to hold in your hands, especially the new generation like yourself, Ms. Nodi. And I will be very happy to go on any specific question you want to raise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paulo. It's been a pleasure hearing you, and thank you for the congratulations. Yeah, yes, we intend to hold up this series of justice process. As the new generation, we do appreciate that our ancestors had been able to pull off this justice mechanism, even though there has been many criticism internationally. And I personally have two questions for each of the panelists, and other questions have been raised. I will give them one by one. First of all, my question is to Ulf that you talked about so many political and geopolitical aspects that has been in the past, but it's been 50 years that we have been liberated, and our sufferings had also always been shown as part of the war, but never it has been shown as genocide. So, what is your opinion that the global actors or the international actors are backdropping on this aspect, that not recognizing our sufferings as genocide? What is your take on this question?
Who goes first?
Yes, you should.
Okay, I mean, since Paulo was had last time the floor, I will take over. Actually, I mean, your question refers also to Paulo's latest statement, which I want just to go a little bit more in deeper, and which I absolutely confirm. From my perspective, is the main forces who were in 1970, 71 against the liberation struggle, trying to avoid it, and today with Pakistan, namely, the Rathakars and all those Islamist forces, they are still active, what Paulo mentioned, yeah, and they're getting increasingly influenced, yeah, and trying to use their networks to I mean, we have to understand that these forces are still not, until today, not accepting the state of Bangladesh. Yeah. So, and they're doing lobbying. Perhaps we would say today in these days, these times, so kind of disinformation. Yeah, they have tremendous leverage among the medias and subsequently also among political decision makers to make sure that certain resolutions are done, or not accepting your policies, or questioning some decisions. So this we have to keep always in mind, and also this politics are always also linked with polarization, and these groups try to instrumentalize political polarization, which you know very well. We don't have to mention names of political parties, but this gets also reflected in debates regarding Bangladesh abroad. And I can only talk about European debates. Yeah. So when you see some reports what's going on in Bangladesh, there is a bias, yeah, and this bias get pushed by these Islamist forces. This is for me absolutely sure, but perhaps Paulo can also add something more in this direction to this question. Otherwise, this would be my comment regarding your question.
Paulo, please add your remarks.
Yes, I was already addressing the issue. I think that one has to understand that fundamental values are really what is the cement that can unite a community, whatever it is. So the United States and the international community, the West, as if we want to use the expression, were absolutely wrong, very, very wrong on what they did in 71, exactly because they did not understand this. This was not an issue of chess, it was fundamentally a question of values. And they are wrong today, not understanding that money cannot buy everything, and that they cannot allow institutions that play such an important role to be bought by powers that have money to function. This is my fundamental remark on the issue.
Thank you, Paulo. Thank you, both of you. You have given your remarks on. I know this question was a bit critical. Okay, so there are some more questions in the Q&A session. There is a question for Paulo. Is there any reformation needed in case for the trial proceedings of the Bangladesh International Crimes Tribunal for prosecuting the perpetrators? If you think that there should be any kind of reformation needed in the procedural aspects.
Well, the international criticism has been focused on the issue of the death penalty, since the death penalty is not accepted any longer for most of the international community. And I have to say that personally, I am against death penalty. The European Union is against the death penalty, but we are making a confusion here that we should not accept. One thing is Bangladesh has death penalty. It's not only the ICT. There is in general death penalty. This is a question, and that's exactly in this regard that this criticism is valid. Another question is the maximum penalty existing, regardless of what it is, but shouldn't it be applied, the maximum penalty, for those who commit the crime of genocide? Of course, yes. Yes. I mean, there is no worse crime than genocide. So the maximum penalty should obviously be addressed to those who are found guilty of genocide. There's no question about that. So I think that the criticism as such is not really warranted. Well, there is the other one, and actually Jeffrey Robertson, who is an associate from one of the lawyers of Jamaat-e-Islam, and he accepted to make an appraisal, and still it's the best. I mean, it is against, it is critical of the ICT, but it's by far the least dishonest of all of those that have been criticizing the ICT. It speaks exactly about this issue of the 3 weeks period. Well, I can agree that this might perhaps be possible to extend, but something that, of course, is not cannot be an eternity, for instance. But I am not a lawyer. I think that lawyers can obviously find, improvements to be done, but I can see the general picture. The general picture is a very, very good one for the ICT. Undoubtedly, it compares, for instance, if you compare it to Nuremberg, there are many more guarantees given to the defendants by the ICT that Nuremberg did to the perpetrators of the genocide, the Holocaust, for instance.
Thank you, Paulo. Again, there is a question. It's for both the panelists. That is, it's from Shurujit Roy Mujumdar. His question is to you all. That is, isn't Bangladesh genocide 1971 also a Hindu genocide? If yes, why not any part is using the term and the fact of Hindu genocide is continuously in denial mode? Should Hindus begin Hindu lives matter? It's a question for both of you. So whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I can start the first attempt to answer this question. Or I'm not sure if it's really an answer, but I would rather describe it as perhaps as like a statement, not so, or a comment. Basically, as personally, I'm very careful with such categorization to use terms like Black Lives Matter or now Hindu Lives Matter, because I'm afraid that this leads to further fragmentation in multicultural societies, multi-religious societies. I mean, there is no doubt that Hindus were victims too, but for the same reason also Buddhists and Christians, not only during the Liberation War, but also up to today. I mean, we have always, you know, the reports about incidents which are happening from time to time. A second reason why I'm very careful with using this term, in particular also in the South Asian context, or in Bangladesh context, because it's a little bit distracting from what from a major point which I earlier mentioned, that these forces, these Islamist forces who are conducting these crimes against the minorities, yeah, not only against the Bengali, Muslim Bengali, but also the Hindus and Christian and Buddhists living in today Bangladesh, and still doing that. It's the same forces, but then we have to understand that these forces are not only against these minorities, they are not only against the state of Bangladesh, they are also against everything which Bangladesh stands for, yeah, against secularism and against democracy, yeah. So for this, I would rather prefer a term that democracy matters and secularism matters. This would be my terms, which I would rather prefer to use this in the context. But of course, we have also to give justice to the victims who are Hindus or Christian or, well, everything who belongs to minorities. So we should not forget them too. This would be my response to this question. Thank you.
Thank you, Siegfried. Now, Paulo.
Yes, certainly. I do agree that the issue of secularism is fundamental, and of course that all lives matter, exactly like I say for the issue of Black Lives Matter. I mean, all lives matter, and that we should not, take no one for its ethnic or religious convictions in particular. That being said, it is quite true that the genocide perpetrators, they really focus on Hindus. That's an historical fact. They actually defended the theory that the Bangladeshis were being fooled by these Hindus that were hiding behind the issue of language, of Bengali, to try to dominate the nation. They defend that. It's true. It's an historical fact. Ignore it. And we should understand, its meaning and its force. And of course, we should utterly condemn it. That being said, the issue is that everyone has to be respected. All lives matter. If I am to make any distinction, it's certainly to say that those who are defenseless matter most, and of course, children matter even more than anybody else, and those who give birth to children first of all. But that's it.
Thank you, Paulo. You have given a quite recommendable answer, because yes, all the lives matter. There is no difference in lives in basis of any sort of discrimination. So there is another question. It's more like imminent question, that is, we have seen the Rohingya crisis. We have seen their part of sufferings as well. So, but how do you describe this as compared to Bangladesh's situation in 1971, and also that how we can actually establish their sufferings, and maybe there could be any sort of reparations, uh, and also in compared to the South Asian region, how do you see it as a uh, compared to the situation, the Rohingya situation? Well, are you getting my question? I think so. This question has been raised by one of our volunteers. So,
Paulo, you want to go ahead on the Rohingya question, or?
Okay, I can. I mean, I have been in the courtesy of the Bangladeshi authorities. I did visit the refugee camps of the Rohingya by the border with Myanmar. I have been in Myanmar as well, mainly considering the issue. And I think it is absolutely a disgrace what is happening there. It is also a supremacist ideology, similar to the one of the Islamists, and a supremacist ideology that the colonizer, I think we have always, the colonizer is very often quoted as the source of all the problems. We should not exaggerate that, but I think that the United Kingdom really has a lot of responsibilities, and especially because it didn't change. It didn't change at all. That is more problematic. But the United Kingdom, the same way that it really, made a partition, it is the biggest responsible for the partition. If you look at Myanmar, which is obviously a different aspect from the partition, but to a certain extent, it also makes part of it. The United Kingdom was responsible for a racialist ideology that was implanted in the country. That it gave rise to this idea that there was, specific races that had a reason why to be separated from the rest of the empire. This goes on. What impressed me the most when I was in Myanmar, in Yangon, in the most important museum, national museum, is that, in the top floor of the museum, I got there, and it was a couple of years ago, it was not a long time ago. And what do I see? The whole floor was dedicated to the races, to the true races. The expression is races. They keep the expressions of Myanmar. And you see something like 15 races that are the approved ones. And so the Bengalis are not there. Okay. And so they did make all this story that's completely invented, that the Bengalis are illegal immigrants. Which is not true. I mean, for centuries, there have been Bengalis along the coast, a lot of them. Because they are Bengali, ethnically, they are Bengalis. I know that, I mean, the Bangladesh Authority does not like very much that the term Bengali is used for obvious reasons, you know, because if you use the term Bengali, then you can understand that perhaps, oh, they are illegal immigrants. They are not. I mean, it's very simply people have been moving for a lot of time, and for centuries there were Bengalis. Some of them might have been there more recently. I mean, in both directions, because a lot of them came from Myanmar to Bangladesh as well. So, and of course the refugees. But to deny the nationality to Bengalis, to say that, well, you have to prove, you have to get papers to prove that your ancestors have been there for 2 centuries, for being given full nationality, Myanmar nationality. This is absolutely outrageous. And this is something that the international community should have never accepted and should have struggled vehemently against, because this is the ideology that made it possible for this ethnic cleansing that took place. And it is a disgrace. And we should not agree with it, and we should do whatever to go against it in Myanmar. And of course, we must give our solidarity to the Bangladesh authorities. It's a difficult task, very troublesome. There is the Islamists are trying to take the opportunity to transform these people that have been persecuted and have nothing to instrumentalize these people. This is a serious concern, and the international community should continue to support Bangladesh. Some of the NGOs, like for instance BRAC, I saw BRAC operating in the Rohingya camps. Fantastic. That's exactly what should have been done, and we have to continue. We have to continue doing this, and we have to say to Myanmar clearly that they have to change their philosophy completely. Ethnically, Bengalis have been in the country and should be considered as nationals, fully nationals, and this is a must of the international community.
Thank you, Paulo. Siegfried, I would like to tell you that we are on time shortage, so if you keep your answer short, that would be very convenient.
Well, after Paulo's explanation, excellent explanation of the situation there, I can't add much more. I just want to, one or two sentence lines. Basically, I'm very careful with comparing different cases, so I would also hold back a little bit in this context, comparing Bangladesh genocide and the Rohingya genocide. But just there are 2 points that you can compare. The ideological point, which Paulo also mentioned, we had this dimension also too, which the British introduced in the context of the Bengali, with the idea of the martial race, and there, which got in the mindset of the West Pakistani military establishment, and where you have a lot of racism and involved when it comes to ideological negative points. But we have also to second point, which I can see, which you can compare, is also in the case of the Rohingya, there is also not only this ideological issues, but also economic issues, which we have to take into account. But this, we don't have time to go into details about the Rakhine state, about the domestic political issues which are involved. So it's much larger. But many factors that you have to take into account, and I'm also lobbying to think about the full picture. But yeah, we don't have much more time to to go in detail.
Thank you, Siegfried, and I'm really sorry that I could not allow you more time. So we are at the end of our session. Thank you so much for being with us. You have been very pleasing to hear because those issues are related to our country and our liberation, our justice process. So thank you very much for giving your thoughts, very thoughtful remarks on those notes. And here we are going to end this session. Thank you all the attendees, the panelists, and the technical team for the support.